Excellent. So we're here with Ross, the artistic director, and we're going to go through some questions about Romeo and Juliet.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Ross, tell me about your vision for Romeo and Juliet. What do you see?
Well, I mean, it's so tricky with Shakespeare because Shakespearean plays, especially the famous ones that are produced a lot, have very famous productions in the past. Which, I mean, the first time I saw Romeo and Juliet would have been at the cinema in a presentation of the Franco Zeffirelli 1960s production, and that stayed with me. It's vivid in my mind. So one of the things you have to do is when you're coming to it is to reimagine what that play could be, because I'm not really interested in putting on somebody else's production. I don't want to do a cover version of Romeo and Juliet. I want to lead the court in finding our own version. And so this was very much influenced by seeing what had been done with the play previously, which is kind of the danger of that, of course, is when you have very strong images of productions in the past, is you can approach this in a negative fashion. By, for instance, the same when you act in a famous Shakespearean role. If you're aware a famous actor has played it before, you almost start by going, well, I don't want to do an imitation of them, which is a really negative way of thinking. If you're working on a play which is a brand new play, it's much easier because you can work from the visions that are created literally in your head. What I tend to do with a play is to read the play, and invariably if it's a play I'm interested in doing, it's because one of the scenes has jumped out and I can see it, I can imagine it and picture it on stage and how it can be done. I won't have seen the whole play, how it can be done, but I will have seen one scene of how it can be done, and then I'll use that as the genesis for my vision for the play and say, well, if this scene is done this way, how do the rest of the scenes, how must they be done to fit into the same production? And that was the case really with Romeo and Juliet. And rather than go down the route of making a political statement with the play, or using the play to illuminate a political statement, you know, for instance, often the play is used to as a basis of two factions which don't get on. So I've seen Irish productions which have him as Catholic and her as Protestant, or a production set in Israel where he's Israeli and she's Palestinian. I felt that's been done a lot in the past, and I felt that the play doesn't really support that weight. It's not making a political statement, and we all know that these are terrible situations. I don't know that it tells us much about those situations or about the play. So what I wanted to concentrate on was this idea of love. And so very much focusing on Romeo and Juliet and the family saga that is the play. And by refocusing and putting this focus on Romeo and Juliet to really look at them as a contemporary couple. So even though this text is 400 years old, we're marrying together the classical nature of the play, which is a 400-year-old text, and a contemporary understanding of what good acting is and naturalistic acting. And even though this production won't be naturalistic, you need to marry the contemporary tradition and the classic tradition together to try and make this play as alive for its audience now as it was when it was originally published or when it was originally performed 420 years ago. And it is. This play still really sings, and we're finding this in the rehearsal room. So very much my vision for this play was to make sure we weren't trying to make a statement and embossing something on top of this play. It was to let this play really breathe, to live, to be vital, because the passions don't run deeper than Romeo and Juliet. It's quite possibly the most passionate play I've ever worked on. And my job is to create a production which is going to release that energy, which will tell the story of two young people. And what interests me is not the impetuosity of their love, but the purity of their love, that they love completely and utterly and very quickly. And that's where we're aiming, that's where we're going.
Excellent. So I guess we've kind of covered that's why you wanted to direct Romeo and Juliet. It's really been kind of stuck with you for a long time from when you first saw your first production of it, and then just now getting your own take on it, but while staying true to the original.
That's right. Well, whenever I produce any play, it's looking at what is right for the court theatre now. Also, I'm looking at what has the court theatre done in the past, and also what's missing in our back catalogue. And we've never done Romeo and Juliet, and I suspect that's because prior to the earthquakes, we lived in a theatre which we couldn't really get a balcony in. We couldn't really get the height of a balcony, and I suspect that technical consideration may have been one of the reasons it was never done. But it's missing on our back catalogue, and it's so incredibly good, and we just have to do it.
What is it that you want the audience to feel when they're watching your production of Romeo and Juliet?
I think that's a curious question, because I never demand anything from an audience. I believe that any response to the work is valid, and if somebody is bored and not engaged by the work, that's because we haven't done our job well enough. But we can't demand attention. When you come into the theatre, I want the work to be vibrant and alive enough that it engages an audience and indeed enriches an audience, but you can't demand that. And so I think any response from an audience member is valid. That's their business, and they're entitled to that response. What I want is for an audience to engage with this play and forget that it's 400 years old. I want them to go, what's the drama with Shakespeare? Why does it come with this? It's too hard, it's too literary, it's too intellectual. Of course, the play is all of those things, but over and above that, it is an incredibly vital play, which I think a contemporary audience, well, I hope that they don't feel they're watching a 420-year-old play. I hope they're engaged with a play with living and breathing characters on the most incredible journey.
That's really good. That actually leads us into the next question, which is, how do you think this story, written hundreds of years ago, relates to people living in Christchurch in 2015?
You know, an actor said to me once that when you're working as an actor on a Shakespeare speech, Shakespeare gets there before you. Shakespeare is there before you, and Shakespeare seemed to understand what it was to be human. And very much so. We haven't changed that much in 420 years. He gets to the essence of what it is to be completely and wildly and committedly in love, more than any other playwright ever has. And that understanding of the human condition has never been defined more clearly than through Shakespeare's plays. And that's why it's possible for these plays not to call out to a contemporary audience, but to shout out loud and hard.
Excellent. And finally, to leave the viewers with something, how would you describe Romeo and Juliet in 3 words?
Passionate, dangerous, life-affirming.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ross. Ross, the artistic director on Romeo and Juliet. So you have to come in and view it when it's out in the Court Theatre. Thank you.
Thank you.